Hello, thank you for joining our second lecture on the Zohar. Today we will continue our study of the introduction to the Zohar with chapter 2. Chapter 2 is often called the chapter of the Nitzanim, which is flower buds. Last time we talked about the lily. Now we're talking about the buds, the flower buds. This is based, of course, on the verse in Shir Hashirim. We were and the last chapter was analyzing the pasuk, the verse of Kashoshana bein hachochim, like a lily amongst the thorns. This chapter is focusing, or at least begins to focus on another verse later in that chapter, verse 12 of Song of Songs, which says, Hanitzonim niru va'aretz. The nitzonim, the blossoms, the early blossoms are seen in the land. I'm reading the entire verse now. Eis hazomir higia, the time of pruning has come. I don't know a lot about growing trees, but apparently the springtime when the blossoms come is a time of pruning. The kol hator, and the sound of the turtle dove nishma bi'artzenu is heard in our land. The birds are starting to sing in the springtime. That is the image one gets. It's a beautiful time of year, a time when things are coming to life, the animals and the trees, etc. So the Zohar begins this the discussion of this verse, and let's see how the Zohar treats this verse. And similar to the way we saw in chapter 1 of the introduction, we are going to see that it compares this time to the days of creation. Bereshit, again, a reference to the Bereshit, Genesis. This is referring back to a commentary on Bereshit, on the creation of the universe. Rabbi Shimon Pasach, Rabbi Shimon began discussing as follows: Hanitzonim niru va'aretz. This is kind of like we get the sense of a free association, which is of course very similar to classical Jewish medrash, with a mystical twist, of course. So the nitzanim niru va'aretz, the nitzanim, the blossoms are seen in the land. So what are these nitzanim? Da ovada divreshis. This is referring to the work of Bereshis, of Genesis. The first 2 days of Genesis, we have the creation of great beings, but not the actual creatures of creation. It's on the third day when creations actually come into existence, right? The first 2 days we have light being created, heaven, water, but so not until the third day when we see things happening, grass, plants, etc., starts on the third day. That's what the Zohar is referencing to now. When are these nitzonim, these blossoms? When do they come out? Right? They come bayom hashlishi, on the third day. When did the land give forth, bring out the desha, the grasses, as it says, of course, in Genesis 1 verse 11, to tadshe haaretz desha, right? The land should sprout forth its grasses or its vegetation. Eis hazomir higia, the next words, the time of zamir, the time of pruning has arrived. Da yom revi'i, that is referring to the fourth day. Dahavabei zamir aritzim, because that is the day on which the aritzim literally means the tyrants, the bullies, were zamir, were pruned, or will be, or are pruned on the fourth day. Now, what is that referring to? This is, of course, a reference to the verse. If you have to look at the verse in Isaiah and Yeshayahu, I'm going to pull that up. Give me a second. Isaiah 25, verse 5, where we have Yeshayahu stating, Kichorev bit. Yeshayahu is talking there about the how God saves the poor, saves the innocent, saves the simple from those that are strong and mighty. big tyrants that oppress and rule over them. And he uses the image in verse 5. It's worthwhile looking at Isaiah 25. It's a beautiful chapter, as of course the entire book. And again, of course, I recommend going to my podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. The first book I taught was the book of Isaiah. That was the beginning of my public teaching here on YouTube and on all sorts of platforms. It's available. But here we have Isaiah. He says, "Kichorev b'tzayon," like heat in the desert. She'on zorim tachnia, right? You subdued the heat. Uh, uh, the rage of the strangers, the rage of the others, you subdued. Chorev b'tzel of, you took away the heat with a shade, with the shade of the clouds. In other words, it's giving God's power to take the oppressive heat, which is here's the reference to the oppression of the powerful over the weak. Zemir aritzim ya'aneh, the singing of the aritzim, of the tyrants, right, is now destroyed, is now gotten rid of. And so the zamir, which sometimes comes from the word zemer, which is a song, also means lizmar, or which is to prune. So zamir aritzim would be the pruning of the tyrants. The other thing that you'd have to know to understand the Zohar, of course, is that the is that who is the tyrant that the Zohar is referring to. So let's we're gonna because on this day ma'oros chaser, the lights were dimmed, the lights were there's things taken away from the powerful light. And this, of course, is a reference to the Talmud and the Gemara and Chulin on 60b, that is Chulin Samach Amud Beis, where the Gemara and Chulin discusses a mythical discussion between the two ma'orot, the two bodies of light. That's the sun, of course, and the moon. And of course, we know the sun is much more powerful than the moon. Although, if anyone has ever been out on a dark, clear night, not in a city where there's tons of city lights, and when the moon is at its brightest and its fullest, it gives a very significant amount of light, but still nothing near close to the sun. And the moon says, there shouldn't be two. According to the legend, the sun and the moon were originally gave equal amounts of light, and they were both as large and as bright as each other. And then the moon said, there shouldn't be two that are the same. We're two sharing the same crown. So God tells the moon, okay, so go be smaller, right? And the moon didn't like that idea. And in the end, God had to cut the moon down, take the moon off its pedestal. So the moon is representative of someone who is selfish, someone who doesn't want to share the glory and the glamour with others, someone who just wants to be the only one. It's not enough that he's wealthy. He has to be wealthier than everyone else. It's not enough that he has things. He has to have more than other people. And in the end, he was ma'oros chaser. That is the action of a tyrant, a person who takes things away from others, even though he already has what he needs for himself. So this is the Zemir Aritzim. That's the Yom Revi'i. That's the day, the fourth day on which this legend occurred, where the God cut down the size of the moon. And then V'kol Hatar, the sound of the turtle dove. Do Yom Chamishi, that is a reference to the fifth day of creation. Because what happened on the fifth day? On the fifth day, animals were created, right? And now all of a sudden there is sound, right? Until then, there was no sound. Until the animals were created, there was a world completely without sound. Of course, maybe there was sound of the wind in the trees, but there was nothing making sound, no beings making sound like animals do. So, D'chsiv Yishritzu Hamayim Lemebad Tolados. And not only were these made sound, they were made sound in Tolados, that they can have children. Nishma, that it continues, the sound was heard. Who hears the sound? That's the human being. Da Yom Shishi, that is the sixth day. D'chsiv Nasa Adam, we should make man. This reminds us of the old idea: if a tree falls in the forest, and does it make a sound if no one hears it? So this is almost arguing that the sound is irrelevant if there's no person to hear it. So on the sixth day, human beings were created, and now there is someone to hear it. Tahava osid lemiktam asiya lishmiya. Because this sound was in the future, there was something very special, right, about the person's hearing, because a person will people one day will say, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. That is the special zuchus we know from the Talmud, where it says the special merit of the Jewish people who didn't say we will listen to the Torah and then we will do, which would imply that we'll hear it and then we'll decide whether or not we'll do it. But rather, Na'aseh, we will do it. V'nishma, we're going to do it, period. Now tell us, now we're going to listen to what we're supposed to do. So this, in the special zichus, the special merit that human beings will one day have a group of people who will say Na'aseh v'nishma, who will say we will do and we will listen. That is something special about the hearing that occurs on the sixth day. Be'artzenu, and then it completes the analysis of the verse, and it says, in our land, da yom Shabbos, the day of in our land. That is referring to the day of the Shabbos, the day of Sabbath, the Ihu Dugmas Eretz Achayim, because Shabbos is similar to the land of the living. The land of the living is usually a metaphor for the days of the future. And Shabbos is compared often to Olam Haba, to the days of the future. It is a taste of the time when we don't have to toil and work hard and break our backs in order to live, but a time when there will be peace, a time when things will be easier for us, and so on. So, and this is a lot of free association here, but this is, of course, a much less mystical analysis of the pasuk, comparing that verse of Nitzanim, of the blossoms, to the land. However, he's going to continue and get into a much more mystical understanding, and so let's do that. Sorry for the short break, but we're going to continue with the second chapter of the Zohar, the second chapter of the introduction to the Zohar. And we just studied the first approach to the verse of Hanitzanim, of the blossoms, which was not so mystical, very similar to the style of usual medrash. But then there's a second version, as Rabbi Simeon continues his discussion of this verse, Nitzanim. And it continues as follows. Hanitzanim, the davar acher, another approach, is that the Nitzanim, these blossoms, Ilain Inun Avahon, these refer to the forefathers, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The Olu b'machshava literally means that they came into the thought, or they arose in the thought process of God, so to speak, to whatever that exactly means. Now, what does that mean, Olu b'machshava? The Zohar is making reference, it's assuming that you are aware of the famous Bereshit Rabbah, the Medrash in Bereshit Rabbah, which states that that certain things, certain concepts and ideas were in God's mind, so to speak, prior to the creation of the world. And it mentions the Avot, the patriarchs, or that the concept, the idea of the patriarchs preceded the creation of the world. And it uses the language of Alu b'machshava. So over here, it's an Aramaicized Alu with an ayin aleph. So remember, the Nitzanim, referencing creation, these blossoms really referred to the Avot that arose in God's mind. The Alu ba'alma, and they came into the world, they came into the existence. But Alu ba'alma da'asi, they came into the future world. The itgenizu taman, and they were hidden there, and they were hidden and uh, disguised somehow into the tapestry of the world to come. Now, whether he's referring to the world to come, meaning the current world that we live in, is what it seems like it means. In other words, it's the world to come because they came into God's mind, so to speak, prior to the creation of the world. So then the coming world, which is the world that we're in today, the concept of the avot was embedded secretly into this world. That's the way I understand this. It could be understood differently. Umitaman nafku bigenizu, and from there, right? They came out in a secret, v'itamiru, right? And goy nevi kishot, and this concept became itamiru. They became some translated like incarnated. They became part and parcel of the person of the true prophets that were to come. This is part of why I understand when it says Ba'alma Da'asi, the future world, meaning it was future prior to creation of this world. But in this world, the souls, so to speak, of the Avot are incarnated in the Nevi'im and the prophets. Presumably, this means that the true prophets, the prophets of Tanakh, the prophets of the Torah and Tanakh. And so here you have a concept that the Zohar is introducing, which is a very controversial top subject in Judaism. The rationalist thinkers who preceded the revelation of the Zohar by several centuries, most chiefly among them the Rambam Maimonides, did not and would not have and supported this idea. And openly, of course, Rambam's rationalist predecessor, Saadia Gaon, Rabbi Saadia Gaon, openly rejected this concept of this idea that a soul, the soul of the, for in this case, of the Avot, of the patriarchs, could then be reincarnated somehow into the souls of the newer prophets. The issue with the reincarnation, which the Zohar is really introducing here, is problematic to the rationalist thought process on many different levels. But among them, it gives the impression and the idea that these prophets were destined to become prophets, that there was something about them, something inherent about them, which and this quality of being of the patriarchs, the spiritual quality of the patriarchs that was part and parcel of their very being. Maybe even it was their very soul. This is what the Zohar is really saying here. Now, this is something which Rambam Maimonides explicitly rejected and explicitly stated many times, that a prophet, being a prophet, is something that a person works on, that a person achieves, that a person isn't born with the ability to be a prophet, but rather a prophet is something that a person achieves by intellectual and spiritual and ethical and moral perfection. So the Zohar is introducing this idea, which lays the foundation, as you can imagine, for a subsequent kind of opens the Pandora's box for what became very prevalent in Judaism from the time of the Zohar until now, that there's something special about certain people's particular souls. So in this one little line here, the Zohar is introducing a concept which has been mainstreamed to a large degree within Judaism, especially Hasidic Judaism, but in Judaism in general, which was different than the pre-revelation of the Zohar Judaism, at least the rationalist side of it. The many scholars understand, actually, and this is something that's a little bit more detailed than we need to go into today, understand the Zohar as somewhat of a reaction to that rationalist thinking. And we see that here, and we're going to see that in many places. And again, I'm pointing out here the many ideas and things, and we're going to see this throughout our study of the Zohar, which is, of course, going to take us many years together, ideas that have become basic in many aspects and in many schools of thought within Jewish thinking and philosophy since the revelation of the Zohar, but which were not the case prior to that. And this is one of them, this idea of a soul being incarnated into another soul. And then it continues and it says, Isilid Joseph was then born v'itamiru bey. And this soul of the tzaddikim, or this idea or concept of the patriarchs, was incarnated or hidden within him. So he had some, all Yosef Ba'ara Kadisha, and Joseph came up to the land, to the Holy Land. The only place where we know in Yosef's life where he came into the Holy Land, of course, was when he left Egypt to come to the the land of Israel, when he came to bury his father after his father passed away, when Joseph was already the viceroy of Egypt. So, and he buried his father there. And so this is clearly a reference to that event, that biblical event that's recorded in the end of the book of Genesis. So Unitziv Lon Taman, and he established, or he planted this holiness there in the land of Israel, this holiness. Uchedein niru va'aretz, and therefore they, the patriarchs, or the spirit of the patriarchs, then became known in the land, iskalu taman, and became revealed there. And again, here we see another concept which the Zohar is introducing, which is again revolutionary, and that is this idea that prophecy comes from a holiness that is implanted in the very land of Israel, that the holiness was literally planted and became part and parcel of the very land of Israel. Again, this explicitly rejecting the concept that Maimonides, that Rambam, and other rationalist thinkers that preceded the revelation of Zohar, again, that believed that the holiness of the land in Israel wasn't something and isn't something inherent to the land, but it is rather a holiness which is achieved because of the things that people did there, of the way we treat the land, what it represents to us, because of the interaction over the centuries and millennia between the people, the Jewish people, and the land of Israel. A very different understanding of the inherent holiness of the land. So when is it that we see this holiness? When do we see this? And the time when we see a keshet, a rainbow in the land, this rainbow, and again, rainbows come from light, right? And remember, we discussed before in the last podcast, when we discussed the first chapter of the introduction, the concept of light. The patriarchs are somehow related to the light of creation, and the rainbow is a representation of that light, but it's a representation with a specific idea. Now, as we know from the Torah, the rainbow is a sign that God gave Noach after the destruction of the world, a sign that God, that promised that whenever I feel like destroying the world, meaning when the world is evil, when things are bad, I look at the rainbow, I look at this light, and God says, I show you this light to reflect my promise not to destroy the land, even though the land may be deserving of destruction. Because when this, the habeshato the keshet is chazeh, because when we see this rainbow, kidain is galion inun, that is when the souls of the patriarchs is revealed, these holy souls. Uvahi shata, and at this time, is Eis Hazomir Higia. That is the time when the time of pruning comes. Remember, we mentioned earlier tonight that the pruning is the destruction or the cutting down of the arrogant, of the evil, of the oppressors, right? So the Eis HaZomir, which is mentioned in this verse that we're expounding upon, the time of pruning these, cutting off the evil people, that's when the keshet, that's when the rainbow comes and saves the world from destruction, right? Higia idon lekatzetz chayavin me'alma, when it comes time to cut out the evil people from the world, but then the avot, the zchut avot, the merit of the forefathers protects the world from destruction. Again, this is bringing up the idea that the merit of holy souls and holy tzaddikim, the holy people who are no longer with us in this world, protects the world. Now, we know throughout the Chazal and the Talmud many times, we see the concept I wrote one example, but there's numerous examples. One in Bereshit Rabbah that's famous. The Amar Rabbi Levi says this is in Bereshit Rabbah, chapter 35. Calls manshat tzadikim ba'olam, as long as the righteous are in the world, ha'olam miskayim, the world is miskayim, the world lasts, the world is established. Nistalku hatzadikim, but when the righteous leave, ba ha'churban la'olam, that's when destruction comes to the world. And of course, one of the main sources of this is the famous story of Avraham and Sodom in chapter 18 of Bereshit, where God comes to Abraham and tells him he's going to destroy Sodom because of their wickedness. And Avraham Avinu prays to God, don't save them because maybe there are some righteous people in the city. So, but the big difference between those ideas as expressed in the Medrash and in the Talmud and in the verses that I mentioned in Genesis those are tzaddikim, righteous people that are around today. The Zohar is introducing a concept that this is righteous people who are not here anymore today. It's these patriarchs, the souls of these patriarchs, that give this protection. Now, if that's the case, then he's giving power, a spiritual power, to save the world to those that are no longer with us. And this again is the concept of righteous, the merit of the righteous that are no longer here to save the world, which again is a controversial subject in Jewish philosophy. It's a subject which, again, the rationalist thinkers who preceded the revelation of the Zohar strongly disagreed with, most notably, again, the Rambam, who was not a big fan, to say the least, of looking to the souls of the righteous for help, to help save the world and to pray to God, etc., on our behalf, and so on. It's a big subject, but again, another idea that the Zohar is introducing in a line, which is a vast idea that the Zohar is asserting here. And it becomes, as most of us that are practicing Jews today realize, it becomes a very basic part of many aspects of Judaism today. Amai ishtezivu. So the Zohar continues. So why is it that the world gets saved during that time when the Eis HaZomir comes, the time of pruning comes? Begin the hanitzonim niru ba'aretz, because these blossoms appear, these souls of the righteous appear in the world. Vilmali de niru, if not for the fact that these righteous souls would appear, lo ishta'arun ba'alma, they would no longer last in this world. V'alma lo iskayam, and the world would not continue. And again, the rainbow is representative of that. And now we continue a little bit more, just a few more thoughts for this particular chapter. Uman mikayim alma v'gorim la'avahan disgalyan. And who is the one that causes the souls of the patriarchs to be revealed? So even the Zohar understands that the souls of the dead are not enough to protect the world. There has to be people active in this world today. Something has to make it happen. And what is that? The most innocent, the most beautiful, the most pure, the most holy, and that is the Kal Yinoke de La'on Bi'araisa, this voice, the sound of children studying Torah. Uvegin Inun, it is because of them, Inun Ravian de Alma, right? Alma Ishtaziv. It is because of these children in the world today that the world gets saved. So there's a process. We here on this world, through the most innocent and most beautiful study of Torah of children, by creating a world in which children study and learn, and live holy lives, right? We arouse the spirit of the Avot, of the ancestors, to then save the world, even though the world is full of so much evil. L'kav lehon, it is due to them, Torei Zahav Naselach, that we become like turtle doves of gold, right? The Elaine Inon Yinoke Ravion Ulmin Dechsiv Yasisha Shnaim Kruvim Zahav. It is because of these young children in the world that it is written that you should build two kruvim, two cherubs of Zav. The cherubs on the Aron, which is representative of the Torah, and a cherub is a child. The image of the cherubs over the Aron, over the Holy Ark, is the image of children studying Torah, it is because of that that the world is saved through the zechut, through the merit of the avot, of the patriarchs. So this concludes the second chapter of the introduction. This is this is presented as the discourse of Rabbi Simeon on the verse Hanitzanim, the blossoms. Again, Zohar introducing ideas which have become very prominent in Jewish thinking after the Zohar, both prominent in the way they've permeated many of the practices that we know to this day, and also prominent in the rejection and objection to these ideas that come from the more rationalist philosophers and more rationalist Jewish thinkers that did not support some of these ideas. So this concludes the chapter 2. I thank you so much for studying Zohar together with me. Looking forward to studying chapter 3 and, of course, the rest of this incredibly powerful and inspiring book of the Zohar. I wish you all a wonderful, wonderful day.